Okay, hey, this is magazine options for the First Strike FSC, or even the sibling Pepperball TCP. So the first option is the factory FSC magazine. Now this one's gutted, but it's the shell. This is the best fitting magazine by far. It just smoothly fits in. Now it is gutted, so if it has the things on it, it won't work as smooth. But it is definitely the best magazine out of all of these. Now the problem with the factory FSC magazine is it only fits these baby 8-gram CO2 cartridges. So that's no good for less lethal self-defense. And you see here are the cartridges. This is 8-gram, this is a 12-gram, and I'm going to show you how you can fit a 16-gram. This is also a 16-gram, but this one won't work. So this is a 6-round magazine, 8-gram CO2. What's nice is it's made of plastic, and it fits perfectly. It looks nice, it looks like it fits, but the problem is it's low powered with the 8-gram CO2. Your next option is getting the predecessor's gun, the T8.1 or the T9.1, their magazine. Now this is an aluminum magazine, so it's significantly heavier, but it is sanctioned by First Strike. This gun was designed to fit these magazines as well. They just don't look as good. They don't fit. You can get a sleeve, and they don't fit as great. See, they don't just slide in and out easily. They're stiffer, but they're extremely reliable. I've had no problems with these, no leaks, no nothing. The benefit of this is that it holds the bigger 12-gram CO2. So you can get that power. If you want to do less lethal, if you're using this for less lethal options and you're using the Grimberg hard projectiles as your strategy, I recommend at the bare minimum that you use the 12-gram CO2. And if you want no issues, you don't want to think a lot, you don't want to make a lot of mods, you just want to, buy and have it work right out of the box, this is your best option. No, it's going to be, the biggest problem with this is it's going to be heavy. That's all. It's going to be heavy, it's going to look a little silly, but it works, and it works flawlessly. So that's a good option. The one comment I'd make about this is the magazines are designed so you can take the follower and lock it down here. So when you have the magazine lying around, the rounds don't come falling out by accident. Or if you're using pepperballs or paintballs, you won't be adding pressure to them as they're sitting idly by. However, when you use the factory magazine and you put it in, it automatically releases the follower. The problem with this is it's a two-step process. You load the magazine in, but the rounds are still not under pressure. You got to remember to release that thing. So for self-defense situations, you don't want to leave your spare mags with it in the locked position. That way, if you have to reload, you're ready to go. Oh shoot. And when you play with these magazines with the CO2 in, you can accidentally discharge the CO2. So that's what just happened there. So you got to be careful. All right, so with that said, the Instinct Industries makes a sleeve for these magazines that cover this. I do not know what impact that sleeve has on that follower lock. It may resolve the issue I just talked about. I don't know. All right. let me, I'm just gonna waste this CO2 cartridge. Okay, so, okay, option number 3, okay? There's a lot of talk about this Instinct Industries Ghost magazine, and this was designed for the older model, the T8.1 and the T9.1. The purpose of this was, it was a 3D printed plastic magazine. The main purpose of this was to give you a lighter alternative to these magazines. I was not a fan of this magazine when I got it. Its biggest problem is it's 3D printed. I get the advantage of 3D printing. It allows, you know, small people, independent people to be able to produce products. You can see the surface finish here is pretty decent, but you turn it around, you can really see the markings of the 3D printing. It's just the problem with 3D printed magazines is they just don't fit well. Now this one I got working well here. Now, I had to do a lot of work to this. First of all, it just didn't fit. It really didn't fit well at all when I first bought it. I had to, when comparing it to the factory magazines, this part was much thicker. So I had to cut that down. I mean, this is, by the way, this is a $30 magazine. You get 2 when you buy the FSC, but to buy more, they're $30. This is also, although it's metal and aluminum and bigger, it's also $30. This is, I forget, it's around $45, $50 shipped. But then you got to supply the internals. It's just a plastic shell, that's all it is. So you either have to have a spare magazine, or you got to buy a $30 magazine on top of it. So in that situation, this thing would cost you $80, because you have to supply the internals. So you could just use, if you have your factory magazines, you could just gut it like I did with this one and use it. With that said, by the way, except for the shell, these 2 magazines are identical with the parts, okay? All 4 bolts holding the 2 shells together are identical from what I could tell. The follower on each, this one's gutted, but the follower on each is identical. This locking pin and the spring and the caps, they're identical. Most importantly, the springs are identical. So even though this is a 6-round magazine and this is an 8-round magazine, I have confirmed the springs are identical. They're the same part numbers. So they're the same length spring, even though one's a longer magazine. The nut inside here is identical. The twist things are identical, with the exception, this one has the FSC parts in it. This screw is just black on the T8.1, whereas on the FSC it's silver. That's the only difference. And then the CO2 valve is identical, with the exception that this one this one has a T8.1 thing. I swapped this one out. The T8.1 comes with a clear seal. This one comes with a black seal. But for all intents and purposes, the guts of these 2 magazines are identical, with the one exception. The one exception of the base plate here. That's the only thing that's different, okay? And I'll tell you why that's relevant a little later on. But so when it comes to buying these ghost mags and you need to fill it with its guts, you can do that with either this mag. The literature for this implies that you're using one of these, but you can, sure enough, use the guts from one of your factory magazines. There's not going to be a problem, and you don't have to worry about the base plate because this one comes with its own base plate. So I had to cut this down to make it fit. All right. The other thing I had to do was, in order to fully cinch down a 12 gram CO2, and ignore all this for a second. In order to cinch down a 12 gram CO2, which this magazine was designed to use, I had to shave down this whole section here. I mean, because this would just rub, and you literally couldn't see, it still rubs, and you can't tighten the screw enough. So right out of the box, this magazine couldn't tighten down a CO2 when it leaked. So I had to cut this down, I had to shave this down. This is right out of the box. And then the other thing I had to do was this. It would lock, but you'd have to bottom the spring out completely and then cram it in. It didn't work as nice as this. And I don't have any rounds with me here, but the way this works is once you fill this with 8 rounds, it automatically locks for you. And then you can decide whether or not you want to release it. This one would not automatically lock. So I had to shave this upward so that this would lock easier. Same on this side. And it's not so, you don't make a straight cut, you got to make a diagonal cut, because this thing's shaped, so you got to cut it like that. So I had to make 3 mods just for this magazine to work out of the box. So that was frustrating. What else about this? All right, so I'm going to get back to this magazine. I did an extra mod to this magazine. Your 4th magazine option. This one is not well known. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but his store is called Cymrutec, Cymrutec, and he's out of England. And he makes a 3D printed magazine. And this one is specifically for the FSC. And what he does is he makes a design. He really, this is well made. It's very accurate. He follows the shell of this. But what he does is he just extends the base plate. So I'm a huge fan of this concept. He just extended the base plate maybe 3/4 of an inch. And what that does is, you can now, instead of the 8 gram magazine, you can now fit a 12 gram magazine. And if you notice, the locking follower is in the same place. So when you put it in, now I do have some problems with this magazine, but it will release that. And it also fits an extra round. So instead of 6 rounds, it fits 7 rounds. So that's an added bonus. And with this less lethal stuff, don't get crazy about how many rounds. You really don't want a lot of rounds. The more rounds you have, the more diluted air. The idea here is to get more grams of air behind each shot. So if you have a 12 gram CO2 and a 6 gram thing, you're going to get 2.0 grams behind each shot. That's really good. So I would highly recommend this magazine if I weren't having so many problems. Now, the design, the measurements look perfect on this thing, but for some reason, and I'm currently working with him, it just doesn't fit well. And then even when I get it in, all right, good. When I start shooting, it dislodges and jams. So I'm working with him. Maybe I got a dud, but unlike this concept, I'm way more of a fan of this. I think this is going to be more reliable. This basically follows the stock style. So hopefully maybe we can get this working. Now with that said, you can use again, I think this is technically cheaper, but the shipping's more because it's coming from England to the United States. So this was maybe a few bucks cheaper, maybe $45 shipped to my door. I think it's a better product. It certainly looks a lot nicer when it actually works. You can use again, it's gutless, so you got to provide your screws. You got to provide the guts, just like this. Yeah, so you really do have to use the factory magazine for this, because unlike this that comes with its own base plate, this does not. So you do have to use the base plate, and like I said, the base plate's the one thing that's different. So if you do use this as the donor, it looks like really you might just have to make some minor modifications to the plastic base plate. So, but really you got to use this as your donor, simply because you'll need the base plate. Okay, now let's talk about increasing the power here. So we just talked about 8 gram and 12 gram. You know, time to take it up a notch. Look at this 16 gram bad boy. All right, and here's another 16 gram cartridge. All right. 8 gram and 12 gram, they're 3/4 of an inch in diameter, basically. So they're both the same width, just one's a little longer. So that way, the same magazine but a little longer will fit the 12 gram. And by the way, this is a cool concept. Although it fits the 12 gram, he includes with all the magazines a spacer. If for whatever reason you want to use 8 gram, you can put the spacer down there and it works with 8 gram. Okay? So what I did was, this Instinct Industries magazine seemed to be a good candidate to modify for a 16 gram cartridge. So what I did here was, I don't know, it's hard to see here, but the floor of the CO2 cavity used to be right here. Okay? And this is like, I don't know if that's a good term, but it's sort of corrugated plastic, like cardboard. So the way he designed these was, he made 2 layers of plastic and then he filled the inside with this corrugation, this triangle zigzag filler. So what you want to do with the floor is, you want to remove the top layer of plastic, all right, and then you're going to get to corrugation that looks like this, and you got to shave all that corrugation down, and then you get to this bottom floor here. And basically, I think that bottom floor is the last layer separating you from the rounds in there. So it opens up this cavity. And then I shaved down the sides. Now I don't know if shaving down the sides was necessary, but I did it, and it made it easier to do this. And then you got to cut out the sides as well. You got to trim it down, you know, and maybe you want to even trim it down more than this. So I don't have a good way of doing this. This took me a whole afternoon to do. I used a utility knife, I used a chisel, I used a Dremel. You really got to get in there and just hack away. I don't have a good way of doing it. But ultimately, in the end, you can now fit a 16 gram bad boy. Now, the 16 gram cartridges you have to use are these 16 gram cartridges. These are designed, they use these for like making beer or growlers or something. You know, food industry, and they also make them for tire inflators for bicycles. So unfortunately, these 12 gram Crossman CO2s, you know, you buy them in some sort of bulk. They're about 50 cents each. Even in bulk, you buy these can range $2.50 to $3 each. That's over 5 times more expensive than these. So, but, you know, I consider this my self-defense CO2. You know, you gotta buy the expensive stuff. It's not something you practice with all the time, that's all. I initially had these specifically for my bicycle, but these things range a lot. The 12 gram CO2s are pretty consistent in the industry. These things are just all over the place, I think. So you see, I think the gold ones, you know, whatever, the plated ones here, I think they're a little thicker. You can see this one's longer. Okay, it's got a sticker on it, which makes it even thicker. You can see how it ripped up. But this is threaded, and unfortunately the most popular ones out there are threaded because they're designed for the bicycle pumps. But the threaded are no good, because you can see, to get the threading, they actually got to make the neck thicker and then tap it, or yeah, tap. So what you want to get is, this is Genuine Innovations. That's the company. They're a big name company of these. 16 gram, but you got to get the unthreaded, and unfortunately those are harder to find. Probably also makes it a little more expensive because they're not as popular with the bicyclists. But you got to get the unthreaded, unfortunately. I've tried this and it leaks because it won't get a good seal because it's too thick. Also, this other brand that I had lying around, the tops are all different. Sometimes they're slanted. They're not made well or consistent. So these Genuine Innovations, they seem to be very well made. So you can see it fits perfectly.